I'm Jade from ProfileTree, and I'm going to be showing you how to build a website from scratch using the latest Bootstrap 4. Initially, when I start off a build, I always make sure that I design the website first, just so that I can get an idea of what it's going to look like once I start creating it in the browser. So as you can see here, I'm just using Photoshop to build each section of the page. So this is the index page of the website. Basically, I'm just going to be showing you how to build it from scratch. I'll show you the finished website first, just so you can get a feel of the interactivity and the different features that it'll include and the hover effects and things like that. So basically here I have each section sorted into groups. So you have the blog section there, which is just this area at the bottom of the page, which gives you a button link to our blog page. Then the footer section, which is just the area at the bottom that includes all of the links to each page of the site and other blog links to our main ProfileTree website, because this website is specifically for our digital marketing agency, which is going to be attached as a sort of sub-site. So we also have the icon grid, which is the 5 icons here arranged in the center. They're also going to have some interactive features that I'll show you later on, and then the different areas like the section header, the banner at the top, and the nav bar as well. Okay, so I also use this as a reference to what colors and things I'm going to use in the site. Normally I would use the Adobe color wheel, which is really handy for establishing what kind of color scheme that you're going to have for your site. Just select a main color that you would like to establish in your website, and it'll give you the matching colors that fit the monochromatic theory or the analog theory, or complementary colors as well. I didn't use the Adobe color wheel in this case because I just used the exact same color scheme that we use on our main ProfileTree site, and as you can see, it also matches the colors in the logo at the top here. But if you have created a design and you can't remember what colors you used, all you need to do is click on the eyedropper tool and select the area, which color that you want to find out. So that's the darker orange here, and it shows up in your foreground color on your toolbar at the side, and once you click on it, that'll give you the exact hex number of that particular area. So that'll come in handy when it comes to building up your CSS for the elements in your website. You can use RGB values or your hex colors, which are the best for websites. So the CMYK would be better for publishing and paper-based creations that you've made, so we won't be using that one in this case. So that's the index page of the site. I also have all of the other pages made up, but I won't show you them as I'm just going to show you the actual main site now. If you want to include PHP in your website, you'll want to run it off a local server if you're not wanting to make the website live and then edit it while it's on a live server. So all you have to do is download the likes of USB web server, which I've used in this case, or you can use WAMP, which is for the Windows equivalent. On Mac it's MAMP as far as I know. So yeah, basically all that does is let you run your site off your local server. And once you've downloaded it, what you want to do is put your web files into the root folder. So I have it here under Bootstrap MBS, so it's Bootstrap Marketing brochure site. So once I've gone into this folder, this is another thing that I think is really helpful when you're also building a site, is make sure that all of your folders are organized perfectly. So in the main Bootstrap folder, I only have the actual PHP files of each of the pages of the site. Then I have the style sheet folder, which shows all of the CSS style files, which will be linked in to the appropriate pages. Then I have all of the Photoshop documents that I've created, just in case I need to go back in and edit one of the images to a different size, or put a filter on it, or change it in some way to suit the site. Then I also have the separate pages themselves here, and then the JS is the JavaScript code, which I've just used for a simple back to top button in this case. And then at the top I have the images, which are all of the images that are included in the site. And they all have very specific names, but it just makes it so much simpler when it comes to editing and finding files, and it's also a lot easier to link to in your actual HTML itself. So I'm just going to show you the actual website now. In order to gain access to this, all I have to do is select my USB web server, load it up, make sure that your Apache and MySQL settings are on, and then all you have to do is click on the localhost. That'll take you and show you all of the folders that you have in the root of your server. So this is the one that we want to go for, and that'll automatically take you to the index.html or .php page. So as you can see, I have the logo on the left, and the website reflects the design that I did previously in Photoshop. But now you can see, the more interactive features where the links change colour once you hover over them, and they have an underline just to make it more obvious to the user where they're selecting exactly. The home navigation link here stays a different colour and underlined because it is the current active page that the user is on, so that just lets them know what page they're on. So as you can see, here is the banner, and we have the learn more button. If I select this, it'll take us to the about page. Since I have a touchscreen as well, I'm going to be switching between using the mouse and the actual touchscreen capability of the laptop. So if the mouse disappears, it's because I'm using the touchscreen. So if we go down the page here, the get in touch button will take you to the contact page straight away. The circle is going to be an image of the founders of ProfileTree, which I haven't got yet, so I just put that in as a placeholder. I also need to increase the size of that just to make it look a lot nicer. So these are the sections which relate to the icons in the index page, which I'll take you back to just to show you. Yeah. So those are the icons that I had in the design, and once I hover over them, they'll fade and change to grayscale. I'm going to show you how to do all of this once I get started and start building the site. So what I'm going to do is basically I'll just be copying and pasting across the code that I've already done, but I'll explain how everything works and how to edit different things if you want to change the transition times or colors and different things like that. And at the end of it, I'll also show you how to make the website live. I don't have it live at the minute, but I have a domain name at the ready, so I'll be able to show you how to get that set up as well. So if I click on this one here, which is the search engine optimization icon, obviously the user doesn't know once they click on it, but if they click, it'll automatically take you to the search engine optimization section here, which matches the icon that the user clicked in the index page. So and there's the back to top button on the right hand side here. Just once you press it, it just takes you automatically to the top of the page that you're on. And the bottom contains all the page links. Once you click on them, it'll take you to the exact page that you need to go to. There's also social media links. We don't have social media pages set up as of yet, so I just fill those with a hash just so that the links don't break or send you to an unknown not found page. Also at the top of each page other than the home page, there is a breadcrumb, which is good for SEO and ranking in Google, just because it shows the user where they've come from in order to get to that stage. So it shows you here that I came from the home page onto the About Us page, and it can also, if I select that, that'll take me back to the home page and into the blog. we have a social media bar at the left hand side here. That's just so that the user can get quick access to our pages. Obviously, as I said, it doesn't link to anywhere because we don't have our social media set up yet. But if you want, you can have your social media page for your business at the side here, just so that the user can get quick access and stuff. So here we have our first section of the blog. This main section is the business strategy. So if we click this button and open it in a new tab, it will send us to the ProfileTree main website, where they have another like full detailed blog on business strategy. Obviously I don't have an internet connection at the minute, so it won't show the actual page, but I know at least that the link is working. And this section below the above blog are directly related to the business strategy, which we've seen above. So when the user hovers over this area, the opacity of the images change, and a description of each section appears once you hover over that direct image. The learn more button, it takes you directly to the main ProfileTree website where we have the full blog posts, but I can also show you an example of a blog post that I created if you just wanted to do it internally within the one website. So when you click on the learn more, it automatically opens it in a new tab for you. I need to fix that, but yeah, so this is that. As you can see, the breadcrumb again at the top shows that you've went from the homepage to the blog to the financial management section. So if I scroll down, this is just the detailed blog about financial management, which you were taken to from the learn more button. So yeah, that's an example of how you can create a full blog post within your site without having to go to an external source, or yeah, which I've named as subblog. So we'll go back here, and so there's 4 sections per each page, which is business strategy, then digital marketing, and the section below that which relates to the digital marketing, then content marketing, and so on. At the bottom we also have a pagination, which allows you to go between each blog section. These links aren't included in the menu, only the first blog page is included in the actual navigation menu. So if I click on 2, it will be directed to the second blog page, which just has another 4 different sections of blog posts and stuff like that. So the same for the third page. This one has the least amount of posts related to it, as that's all we've done so far for the site. But once more posts are created for those particular sections, like what is internet and video marketing, then we can add them to the related post area below. But for now, I'm just going to move on to the contact us page. It's not shown here, but I had a full width embedded Google map, which I will show you how to include into your site. Below shows, on the left hand side you have the contact information for ProfileTree, and then a form which users can fill out in order to get in contact with the business as well. So that's the full website. I'm just going to start from scratch and show you how to gradually build the site. Hopefully this is informative and it helps you create your own dynamic site as well. There's so many different types of sites that you can create using Bootstrap. Obviously you could see that I created a blog there. The only thing with Bootstrap is that you would have to go in, and anytime you wanted to post a new blog, it wouldn't automatically update. You would have to do that manually and create one yourself, but it's such an easy process that you'll probably just want to handle that yourself anyway. Whereas with things like WordPress, you'll be able to include a plugin which would just automatically update any blog posts that you've included into the site, which is quite handy. But I just really enjoy using Bootstrap 4 or like elements of Bootstrap 3 as well, so that I can have full control over the back end of the website and front end, where sometimes things like WordPress can be a little restrictive in terms of design and functionality. Okay, so let's get started. You want to begin by downloading Notepad++ or brackets. I'm just going to use Notepad++ for this example because it's what I've been using since I started developing websites. So here is the index page of the site. I'm just going to create a new file here just so that we can start building the site from there. Actually, first of all, I'm just going to copy all of the JavaScript and image files that I have, just so that I don't need to add all of these in at a later date. I'm just going to create a new folder within the root of the web server, and I'll just call it test site, all lowercase. So paste. And let us copy. Okay, so you can either download Bootstrap onto your computer or you can just automatically link it into your actual page code, which I've done here. So you want to begin by declaring the type of document that you're creating. So here you have doc type HTML, and then you have your standard HTML head, body and ending tags as well. Always remember to close all of your tags, otherwise that could end up causing none of the code to actually work once you load it in your browser. So this link here, which is the style sheet, it links directly to the Bootstrap version, which is their latest Bootstrap 4. So I'm just going to copy these links here in the head. Then paste it into our new document. The meta course, that is basically saying that it's in English. And then the viewport helps with scale on your browser and how it's going to affect your responsiveness once we get to the responsive design of the website. That's just going to allow users to be able to view your website either on a large computer screen, a laptop, a tablet, or a mobile phone. And then below here we have the link to your actual style sheet. So I have my responsive style sheet already in it. Normally I would have had my regular style sheet linked in, but now I've commented it out using the comment symbols for HTML. I'm just going to save this just so that you can see the different colors that are also used in Notepad++. So Control S, and I just have to go to the root folder. Then into the test site and name the page index.php or HTML. It doesn't really matter because I'm not going to be including PHP in this actual page. I just like to do that in case I want to add something at a later date. But always make sure that you define what type of document is going to be. So index.php and then press save. And that'll automatically save it as an actual page that now I can go and load into my browser. So as you can see here, this line is totally commented out. It's in green because I have the HTML comment symbols on either side of the link. So I commented out my style sheet because I know that I'm going to automatically have to do responsive design. I just start off by designing from the widest possible screen. Other page builders and things would normally design from mobile view and up. For some reason I just prefer designing it from the wider screen and down. If you want to try it from the mobile up, you can totally do that, that's no problem. So yeah, I've just automatically linked in the responsive CSS because I'm just going to start off developing the site within the maximum 1960 pixel width that a screen can get. And the link below here is direct to Google Fonts, so these are the two fonts that I'm using in the site here, which is easy enough. All you have to do is go onto the Google Font website and choose whatever font you would like. Normally I would choose the font for my header first, and then once you select that font, it'll show you a range of different options that actually are well matched with that particular font. So Poppins Source Sans Pro was the text that matched the Poppins really well, so I chose those two, and it's also the font that we use on our other ProfileTree website. So you just link this in the head section, and that allows you to include the font families within your CSS for the site. So the body section, I'm just going to exit this for now. So you start off the body section with your navigation. I got this code from the Bootstrap website. If you just go to their documentation area, it'll automatically show you different types of nav bars that you can include, different styles of nav, so you can have tabs or buttons or just plain lists. In this case, I just have links. You can also I could arrange this in a list and it would work exactly the same way. So I have it as a fluid container, because from the design that I did, all of the content within the actual site is within a container, but the navigation panel and the footer area are both in a fluid container because they're wider than the rest of the site content. So I have this in container fluid nav, and this here, the button on click function, that is for the back to top arrow, which uses JavaScript, which I'll show you how to build later and things like that. So I'm going to copy this whole navigation code and paste it in here. I forgot to copy the body tag, so always make sure that you have your body tags opened and closed. Okay, so nav class, expand, large. These are just the different types of classes that are linked to the Bootstrap style sheet. The nav brand is the logo that I have on the left hand side. You can include just text if you like, but I included our company logo. I can also set, normally I would have this set to index.php, which is, and if the user is on like a different page on the site and they want to quickly get back to the home, they can just click either the home link in the navigation or the actual logo. Or if you don't want it to do anything, you can just leave it as the hash. The button class, so this is basically for when you're viewing the site on smaller screens, like on tablets or on mobiles. I'm pretty sure the collapsed menu only shows up when you're below 767 pixels. It's just so that the navigation doesn't look squashed, and then you can press the collapsed menu at the top and that'll bring down all of the menu links for you. And below here we have the actual navigation links. So we have the A tag, which represents a link, and then it's within a nav item and nav link class. The MX4 class that I have at the end of each link, that's a feature of Bootstrap 4, which basically allows you to create spacing between the links. M stands for margin, and you can either put margin or padding, which would be px. The x is because the padding is on the x-axis, and you can also determine which size of padding that you have. So I'm pretty sure it goes 1 to 4 on Bootstrap. I'm not entirely sure, but that's on the website, which you'd be able to get if you just type in spacing on their website. And that'll just show you the different types of spacing that you can do between your elements instead of having to type specific pixels into your CSS. So the href is the actual link, as I was saying earlier about the image. So I have the home one hashed out because you don't want to be able to click on the home page and reload the page once you're already on it. So all I have is the About Us, Blog and Contact Us pages filled in, just so that the user can access the other pages of the site through the navigation bar on the index page. So once you navigate to any of the other pages, for example the About Us page, the href for the home page will be filled in to say index.php, and I'll have the aboutus.php hashed because I'm already on the About Us page. And as you can see, I also have it set to active on this home page, which allows this to remain a different colour and underlined from the rest of the elements of the page, but that also depends on what way you do your CSS, so I'll just show you how to do that in a bit. So we'll move on to the next section. So first, before I continue, I'm just going to show you what this initial setup looks like. Obviously I don't have any CSS or anything linked in, so it's not going to have all the styles that I have shown you from the previous site that I've built. So you just go to run at the top, and then I'm just going to run it from Chrome because that's my default browser. And because I have those images already linked in and I had them set up in the test site folder, they obviously haven't been styled, so they haven't been resized or anything yet. If we scroll to the right here, you can see the links on the actual navigation. So let's make this prettier and move on. Actually, we'll just start building up the CSS just so that we can make it look nice as we're going along. So I'm just going to open my responsive folder from the previous site. So here you can see that we use media queries to create the responsive feature of the site. So this means that the screen size of a maximum width of up to 1960 pixels will follow these CSS styles. So that's just going to show the global CSS for the different headings and paragraph text and buttons and things like that, which are basically the same throughout the website. In order to separate the sections and make it a lot easier to arrange your CSS, I use comments to create my sections. So this is the global section, obviously, and then you have the CSS for the nav bar, which ends here. It just prevents you from having to keep going back and forth between the various like div classes and IDs that you're using throughout the CSS. So this is the banner, and so it just goes in order. So I basically started with the elements on the index page, and then once we go down to the bottom, that'll show you the breadcrumb for the about page, and then the profile section on the about page, and so on. Once we get to the bottom, there's quite a lot, but once we get to the bottom, you also have to close off that media query just to make sure that any elements within it are going to be working properly. Between the Bootstrap breakpoints, you can add in your own parameters just to edit certain elements. So I'm just going to start by developing it within the responsive setting. So back to the top, and I will copy this and paste it into a new file, close that, and Control S for save. Make sure that you save it into the right folder. And I don't have a folder created for that yet. I can create a new one if I just right click. So this will be CSS, and I can name it responsive .css. Remember to declare what type of document that you're going to use. So just save, and that'll create the actual style sheet page for you. We already have it linked here. Make sure that if you're using an external page that it's always linked in to your header section, and if you're using JavaScript, it's linked just before the closing body tag down here. So now that I've got the responsive style sheet saved into the CSS folder, I have to go to the link here that I've pasted into the index page, and this is the name of the folder that it's in, followed by a /, which basically means that the code is going into that folder and looking for the file named responsive.css. So since I named the folder CSS, I'm going to have to change this over just to make sure that it's able to read that style sheet and load the styles across. Yeah, so let's save that, Control S, and then go into the responsive, and let's just take the styles that we need for the navigation bar. So I already have it labeled out, as I was saying earlier. So I'll just copy all of this and paste it into the first media breakpoint. I should probably get some global CSS as well. I'll also explain what the different CSS and classes and stuff means as well. So I'll get all of the heading tags and the paragraph tags. So H1 to H6 are just the different sizes of headings that you can get. H1 being the largest, which is what you would generally use for the main heading of pages and things like that, but it doesn't really limit the size of a heading. You can still have a heading 3 that'll have a larger text size than your first heading, just depending on what you've set the font size as in the CSS. So I'm going to copy that, and actually I'll take that global heading there. Okay, so again from earlier I had the href link to the Google Fonts style sheet for those two fonts, Poppins and Source Sans Pro. This is basically the CSS that you need for those particular fonts. I have the headings and the paragraph text all set as Poppins, and then if we go down you can see that the navbar links have been set to the Source Sans Pro. Okay, from the top, the P tag, which is the paragraph tag, which you'll include in your HTML. Here I have the font size set to 10 points within those parameters of that breakpoint. And then I've also set the color to hex color 6.3. Hex colors are always going to have 6, either a mixture of digits and letters, or only digits or only letters. It really depends on what shade you're going for. That particular shade is a dark grey, and it goes between white, which is 6 Fs, and black, which is 6 zeros. So that's where the spectrum of colour goes between. Down into the nav bar, I will actually split these in half just so that you can see the two screens at the same time. I'll save that first, because I'll need to reference back to the index page in order for you to be able to see where the classes are coming from. Okay, so don't forget to close the HTML tag as well. Okay, so the container fluid nav is this class here, so you put a dot before it because it's a class, and if it's an ID within the div then you use a hashtag. So the container has got a display of inline flex and flex direction row, which basically means that the navigation links, like the home, about us blog and such, will all be displayed in a horizontal line right beside each other, and that also allows the brand logo, the image of the business, to be displayed in the same line as the navigation links. So by declaring the display and flex direction of the container fluid class, what that basically means is that anything within this particular div will be affected by those styles. So Notepad also allows you to see where the ending div tag is. So you can see this is where the div class ends, so that allows you to be able to determine what exact elements are going to be affected by that CSS style. And then down you have the navbar brand class, which is here, and it has that image of the business logo in it. So I've set the width to be 10% and the height to be just automatic, so it adjusts to the appropriate size depending on what the width was set to. In order to style that exact image, I had to put in the img tag. It's not a class or an ID, so you don't need to put a hash or a dot before it, but if you want to style a particular thing, you have to put the class that it is within first and then the actual element abbreviation. I've also set the width of the actual navigation bar, so that is saying that the width of the nav bar, which contains just the links itself and not the actual logo area, is 500 pixels in width. And then we have the styling for the actual links here. So A is the element in which the class is being called, and the class is called nav item, which has been set to that red color that I showed you previously, and the font that I was talking about, followed by the size of the font. If you want to include extra interactive features, you can add the hover functionality. So that basically just means that this is the color, font family, font size and border color of the link once you hover over it. So once your cursor hovers over any of the links here, then the color of the text will change to this, and the font size here, and the border bottom, which is what creates the underline effect. And then the active.active class, that just styles the link for when you're on that particular page, just like I was showing you with the index page where the home remained a different color and underlined to the rest of the navigation links. Focus is similar to active. That's more when you're actually clicking on something and holding it down, which is more of an issue with buttons and things like that, because sometimes they'll have an outline. With Bootstrap buttons, they'll have like an automatic sort of faded border outline, which I like to change because normally it's depending on what type of button you use. So there's like several different types of buttons on Bootstrap, like button info, button danger, button success. So like the success one will be a green color and the danger one will be a red color, and I use a few of them throughout the website, which I'll show you as well. But that's more for the buttons, and I'll show you how to, once you've actually started creating the site and building the structure and the style to it, I'll show you how you can inspect certain elements and edit them without having to change anything in your actual code as well. So I'm just going to save these files and see what it looks like now. So run it in Chrome. Yeah, so you can see that the logo is now in line with the navigation links here as well. I haven't put the CSS in to resize the button, so that's still massive in the corner here, but yeah, these have been changed appropriately, and as you can see, that's the active tab. So let's go back in and add more elements to the page. The next section is the banner area. Copy. And save. So with Bootstrap, it works in columns and rows. My initial div class banner, which is what I'm going to set the background image as. So the banner that I've previously created. Let me see. Yeah, so this banner here is the one that I've created for the index page, and then I'll put the headings and buttons over the top of it later. But yeah, I've created that, so all I'm going to do is set that as the background image for the actual index page, and that is, I'll actually move this over to here so the 2 indexes are together and 2 responsives are together. I'm only working off one screen, so I'm not used to this, but if you have 2 monitors, even better, because it just allows you to multitask and be able to sort out your code a lot easier rather than having to go back and forth between several different pages. So I'll find the banner section here. Yeah. So you can see there that the class banner, the div class banner, has the background image of that banner PNG that I created, and there's some padding at the top and bottom just to make the actual image visible, because if you don't put padding to the background image, then nothing will display. It'll just be a very, very thin line. So I'm going to add headings and the button in it as well, which will make the image even more visible as content is added into it. It'll also spread across the full width of that class because it isn't within the container. If it was inside the container, then the banner would only be 80% of the width of the screen, which is what a standard container width is. If it was in the container fluid class, it would be slightly wider, but I want it to be the full width of the screen, so I have it set outside of the actual container. So I'm going to copy all of this. And save, and then you have the class row. So basically Bootstrap works in rows and columns, and if you want to add an element, you set it within a row class, and then you can have different amount of columns. So every row has 12 columns. So if I wanted to put 3 elements within, like let's say 3 images within one row, I could set them to call 4. So each of them would be call 4. So I would have div class call 4 for the first image, again for the second image, and then again for the third image. And these would all be placed within the same row class. And then they're going to be arranged depending on what way you have the display set in the CSS. For here, I only have it set for column 12 because I want that to be the case for every single size of screen. But you can edit it depending on what size of screen you have. So you can see below here that I have call LG5. I have them all set to 5 in this case, but if you wanted to, for a large screen, you could set this particular element to be in a 5 column width. And then once you get to the medium, it could be a 3 column width, so it'll take up less space on the screen. So that represents the large screen, the medium size screen, the small screen, like a tablet or something like that. I think it's under 767 pixels is a small screen, and then the extra small, which would be the mobile view as well. But because for this section I'm just keeping it the same size the whole way through, I don't need to add in MD or LG or anything like that. So within that column row is when I actually put the content that I want. So I've set the first heading, so it's a heading 3 since it's going to be smaller than the main heading here, digital marketing. You know, you're not going to have the same content as me, so it's really depending on what you're wanting to do. I just wanted to make sure that all of the headings were a different size just so that they all stood out individually. And then below the headings I have the button, which is the button danger, which means it's going to be the default red one. Using the CSS, I've been able to style it to fit whatever colour and shape that I want. Within that I also have a href link, so that means when the person clicks on the button, then they're going to be taken to whatever page that you have linked within it here. And then you also have the text for the button, which is going to be between that href tag and the closing a tag for that. So that's where you put your text that you're going to have in the middle of the button. I'm going to go back to Chrome here. And just refresh. I don't have it working off the local host at the minute because I don't actually have any PHP in the page. So if you're just running it with HTML, CSS and JavaScript, you don't even need to use a server for it to be able to work properly. You can just run it straight from Notepad and it'll load in your browser straight away. So as you can see, the image is full width of the page. You have the smaller H3 tag and then the larger H1 heading, and then the H6, which is the smallest type of heading that you can have. It's also set to a different color, which you can see in the responsive code. So here you have the banner class and then heading 6. It's been set to that orange color, whereas the rest of them are a dark white. And I've also set the font size of the H1 tag to 48 because it wasn't big enough. So I just wanted to make it bolder for it to be eye-catching as well for target audience. If you don't want to insert a bold tag into your HTML, you can also use the font weight instead, which I've set to 600, which just makes the text stand out a bit more. Also, I need to copy over the link CSS for the button because it's been set to the default blue, whereas I just want it to be white. I think that was in the global code, so I'm just going to go back and get that here. Yeah, so there you have button and A, which is the link, and I've set it to the color the same as the H3 and H1 tags. You also want to have your style for the button when you hover over it as well. So save, refresh. Yeah, and it's corrected itself now, so when I hover over the button it will also change to the darker red colour, which matches the colour scheme that we'll have set up for the design. So next I'm just going to get rid of that really annoying large button to top image. I'm just going to get the CSS for that now and the actual HTML code. Well, it's already in the actual nav bar up here. I've linked the back to top button up here just so that the user is brought directly to the top of the page once they click it. So here's the on click action, which just means that when the user clicks on the button with their cursor, that particular function is called. So I am going to open the JavaScript file, which I transferred over earlier in the JS folder. So it's set as, or it's named back to top. So as you can see, I have comments just to briefly explain what each of these sections do. So the first section here, when the user scrolls down 20 pixels or past, that is when the actual image will show up, allowing them to click on it and bring them to the top of the page. So it just calls that function. So what the function is saying here is basically if the document body is greater than 20 pixels or if the document element is greater than 20 pixels, then get the element by ID, my button, which is the ID class that the actual move to top button is set within. And then it says class style, so this is applying a style and a display to that particular element. And it's saying block, which means that the element will appear once the person has scrolled past 20 pixels of the page. And then below it says else if these requirements aren't met, then display nothing. So that means that the button won't be displayed if you're still at the top of the page and haven't moved down or haven't scrolled down at all. And then the function here is the top function that I showed you that was called in the on-click event in the index page, which basically just says automatically set the body and document element to 0, which is the top of the actual page. So that's already been saved in the folder, so I just need to get the actual JavaScript code for that. JavaScript, as I said earlier, is at the very bottom of the body tag just before the closing tag. Here I have the Bootstrap JavaScript files and some jQuery as well. So I'm just going to copy all of the Bootstrap JavaScript files and my personal ones that I've created. And put it before the closing body tag here. I don't need this anchor script anymore. And save that. So now I just need to put the actual CSS for the button. I think it's at the bottom. Yeah, there it is. So back to top CSS. I'll just explain this briefly as well, and then I'm gonna test it out in the website. So the My Button is the button ID, which you have here, the ID My Button. So basically the display none just means that the default is that it won't be displayed until the JavaScript code runs and the screen has moved past 20 pixels down the document. Then it's a fixed position, so it always remains on the screen in the same position, just so that the user can have full access to it at all times. The bottom and right also allows you to position the button. This means that the actual image is going to be displayed 20 pixels from the bottom of the document and 30 pixels from the right. So there's going to be 30 pixels of padding on the right of the button as well. And then the Z index is basically the distance that the button is from the top of the page. So I have it set to 99 just so that it's very close to the bottom of the browser. There's no border around the image or outline, and I've set the background color to that shade of grey with padding around the image as well, just to make it a little more professional. And the border radius, that just determines the amount of curvature that the corners of the image are going to have, or the button is going to have. And then once you hover over the button, the background color just changes to a darker grey. You can also change the size of the image. As I was previously saying, you use the class or the ID that the element is within, and then the actual thing that you want to style itself. So I'm styling the image within the My Button ID. So the image is here, coming from the images folder. And I've set the height to a specific number of pixels rather than having it as a percentage. So I'm just going to save that and then test it out. Yeah, so it's disappeared because I haven't added enough content into the rest of the page in order for the actual button to appear. So once we start adding more content in, then you'll be able to see the back to top button appear as well. So the next section we'll be adding in is the strip. As you can see, the column class is within the row here. There is 3 columns in this row. The first one contains the heading for text, which says how can we help. Remember to close your tags as well. If you don't want to have to keep putting in different classes and things in order to style an element in CSS, you can just put it directly into the actual element here. So within the H4 tag, I have style equals and then speech marks just to open up the actual CSS style, and then you can set the color to whatever shade you want, and I've got the text aligned as center within that particular column as well. On to the next column, which is a different size from the first and last ones because there's 12, so there's 5 either side for the text and then 2 for the remaining 2 columns left for the 3 lines that I've created. So I'm just going to go into the responsive code and grab that. So it's under orange strip because the background is orange. So you can see that the background color for that ID has been set to that shade of orange. There's also padding at the top and bottom, just like the banner, just so that the elements aren't pressed against the top and bottom of that background, just to give them a bit of space and make it look a lot more professional. I've also set the column 2 width, which is the middle element, which contains the 3 lines, to display inline flex, just to make sure that those lines aren't displayed in one row vertically, but rather as 3 separate elements in a horizontal line. I'll show you what that looks like once we have saved everything and run it on the browser. You can also see here how I created each of the lines. So they have an outer and inner layer, which has a width of 1 pixel because they're going to be very thin lines. The margin is auto, which means that they'll automatically be centered in their columns. The height is 50% of the column that they're in, and the inner style is that the line is 100% width and 100% height within that 50% height. It's a bit confusing, but it's basically set to the full width of whatever has been set previously here. So 100% width means that it will always be 1 pixel wide, and the 100% height means it'll always be 50% of the column that it's contained within. I've also set the background color to a dark grey and top 30%, which just means that the first 30% above the line will be uncolored, so that means that that line will be a lot smaller because the top 30% has been taken away from it. So there's also a box shadow which has the same shade of the background color. This also counts for the third line, and the middle line is going to be slightly larger than the rest of them because the height has been set to 100% in the outer layer, whereas the others have 50%. So I'm just going to save that and run it. So there you can see that the 50% height makes these 2 lines a lot smaller than the center line. Also, I will show you how to use the element inspector in order to edit different styles and things in your browser. So you click on any of the elements in your browser, right click, go down to inspect, and this window will open at the bottom. This basically just shows you all of the HTML that you have in the page so far, and on the right is the styles that you've applied to that specific element. If you go over to the far left here, where the arrow icon is, and click on that, it will highlight blue, and that allows you to select specific elements. So I can select this button and go to the styles over on the right, and I can change the background color to, for example, black, and there you can see it automatically changed in the window here. I haven't set the border to black, so that's why the red border still remains around the button, but you can see that you can change different styles and arrangements and displays of certain elements without actually editing your code within Notepad, which is a lot handier because it means you don't have to go back and forth reloading the browser page again and again just to test to see what looks the best. So you can just continually edit your styles within the CSS area of the element inspector, and then that means that once you've determined what exact styles that you want, you can just use your cursor to highlight what you've created and copy it and then paste it into your actual style sheet, and then that means that the CSS that you've done in the browser hasn't been removed either. If you're working through the element inspector and you're wanting to use the style in your actual web files, then make sure that you don't refresh the page while you're using the element inspector, because that'll just revert the style back to its original default that's set in the Notepad style sheet. So I'm just going to exit this and refresh the page, and you can see that it returned back to its original style there. So the icon section is next. So I'm just going to copy that across. And I will have probably added enough content in now that if you scroll down you'll be able to see the actual back to top button as well. I'll also take over the CSS for that as well. save, and okay. So before I explain the icon strip section, I'm just going to show you where I get all of the material on the Bootstrap website. So you just go to getbootstrap.com and you can either download it directly onto your device, or you can link it in through the style sheet and the JavaScript links that I provided earlier. So if I go down here, these are the links that I've used in Notepad when initially creating the page. So this is the CSS style sheet that you need, and that's just in the head section. And then, as I was saying, the script for like jQuery and JavaScript go before the closing body tag in your page. So in order to get different code snippets, you just go up to documentation. And there again, in the introduction, it'll give you the links that you need to copy into your document. There's different categories that you can choose. So in layout, there is the grid system. So there you have the container class, and then below the fluid container, which just shows you the size difference between the two. And then below you have the media breakpoints, which I've used when creating the responsive code. And then below you can also include media breakpoints for certain screen sizes, such as extra small, small, medium large and extra large, instead of having to type in the exact pixel size. So if we go into content now, this just shows you a bit of everything. So you have the different heading sizes, and then things like ordered lists and unordered lists. You can also have descriptions with bolded text or a pre-formatted text, which works in rems. And you also have tables, which can be created through the table class, and forms as well for things like the contact page, where you'll have someone filling in their information in order to get in contact with you. I'll show you once we get to the contact us page how to create a form from scratch. I used one of their forms off the Bootstrap website and just edited it to suit my style for the website. So I just changed like the colors and text and things like that, and the arrangements of some of the form fields. So in the content you have the typography, which is just the different font families that you use in the website, code that you can use. The images area here just shows you how to apply your tag, your image tag, to your code, and also include classes that will style the images in a different way. So this one has img fluid, which stretches it across the page. And then down you have the different types of alignments that you can do. The class for this one is img thumbnail, which just sets it as a standard thumbnail size. And then you can have the float left and float right classes, which align the images depending on which class they have in their tag. And then they are also rounded, so they have slightly curved corners to them as well. The same would apply for the tables and figures sections here, but the most important area is the components, which just gives you an array of different features that you can apply to the website. So here's alerts, which could be included in things like your forms. When someone completes a form, you want to give them a successful alert to say, thanks for the feedback, or thanks for getting in touch, and so on. So the code for that is supplied right under each section. So you can just directly copy it to your clipboard and then paste it straight into your text editor, like Notepad or brackets or whatever you're using. So the buttons that I was talking about earlier, these are the different types of buttons that you get. So info, danger and success. This is the code for each of them with their appropriate classes, but you can easily edit the colors and everything like I showed you earlier as well. There's also different types of buttons, so you get tag buttons and outlined buttons, and then you can also change them from large or small, or make them spread across the whole column, and they can either be active or disabled. The Bootstrap website really has a lot of material for you to choose from, and you can also edit things yourself, so you're never really limited to any specific style. You also have advanced features like image carousels, like the one below here, which just shows a simple slide which you can put either videos or images into. You also have the code for the different nav bars that you can get So to create the website that I'm showing you at the minute, I just used this code here. As you can see, it's the exact same with the A classes and the navbar brand and things like that, which I just changed from the text to insert the image. Obviously, its default color is going to be light because that's the class that is applied to it. But as I said, you can edit any of these things to suit your website. So there's a variety of features to choose from in order to build up a really dynamic website. So I'm just going to return to the code here. I've already saved the icon strip and the CSS for it. So I'm just going to open it in the browser here. So you can see that there's the icons strip here, and you can see here that the back to top button is present in the corner with the padding from the bottom and on the right there as well, which I included in the CSS. But if I scroll back up to the top, it disappears because it hasn't went past the 20 pixels that is required. If I press this, it'll go directly to the top of the page for me. So I know that that works perfectly fine as well. The icons have the blur effect on it with grayscale. That code I didn't get off the Bootstrap website. I just looked it up on the internet. Literally, if you just type into Google things like CSS transition effects or something like that, you'll get a mountain of forums and code snippets from CodePen and everything like that. And they're all public, so it's not copyright or anything like that. It's all for the public to use, and you can just style it to fit your website. So originally the blur was a lot heavier, so I just changed it so you could still see the image partially, and I left the grayscale as what it was, but I'm just going to show you that code now. So you can see here in the CSS, in order to get the blur effect, I have the class hover10, which is here just below the column classes where each of the images are placed. They're also within a figure tag, which is needed for the purpose of hovering. So when your cursor hovers over the area within the figure tag, so the image itself, then the opacity will change to 1, which means that the effects that have been outlined in the CSS here will be applied. So basically that means that within this class here, you have different types of filters for different browsers to make sure that they work on different types of browsers. So you've just set the grayscale to 0 and the blur to 0 initially before any hovering, so that means that the image appears totally normal. And you also have to set a transition time, so in this case it's 0.2 of a second, easing out and in. So that basically means that when you hover over the image, the blur doesn't happen immediately. It happens within 0.2 seconds, as well as the grayscale effect. And then below you can see here the CSS for when you hover over the image. So I have the class outlined, the hover10, which is included above each image, and then the figure tag, which they're within, and the hover effect separated with the colon there. So what this is basically saying here is the image. So what this area is basically saying is within the hover10 class, you have the figure, and when the user hovers over the area within the figure, then the image displays the grayscale in 100%. So it'll be fully grey, and the blur effect will be 1.5 pixels. So before here, they're both set to 0, which means that there is no effect. And then once you hover, you get these effects that are outlined with the 0.2 seconds ease of transition. I'm not using an on-click event anymore for the anchors, so I can just remove that from the actual code. So in order to create these lines, I just used the same code which I used in order to create the 3 dividing lines in the orange section above. The first 3 were outer 1 to 3, and now I have the outer 4, 5, 6 and 7 for this area. So I have the initial icon strip ID, which just points out what the section is and allows me to change the background color if I need to, but I've just left it as the default white shade. It's also within the normal container. I've also created a row class followed by the column class. In this case, I added another class called mar into the row class just so that I could add a margin to the bottom of that particular row, as you see here in the CSS on the left. There is a margin bottom of 10 pixels for that particular row. And I've used the same column layout as the section above with the 5 to 5 columns. However, the class for the smaller screen sizes, which here is called SM12, I've changed it for the smaller screen size so that when you're using a device that is below 767 pixels, the image will take up 12 columns of that row. So basically, even though they're all in the same row, because this has been set to take up the 12 rows, that image will be at the top, taking up the full width of the container. And then you have the line separating, which I will change its display to be hidden at that screen size. So basically the line will disappear and then it will just be followed by the next image, which is also defined by the same class. So once you get to the smaller screens, each of these images will be in a vertical line, one below another in separate rows. But if I wanted to, I could keep it as the 2 images and line separator in the one row. However, you don't want to make your images or separators too small on the likes of a mobile phone. So you want to make sure that the images are spread out, that they're fully visible for the viewer to see. In order to be able to check the responsive view, you can also use the element inspector for this. So you just right click again, and then beside where that previous element selection tool was, there is an icon with a small mobile phone and a bigger tablet. So if you click on that, that will automatically show you different types of viewpoints. Obviously, I haven't added in the style yet, so it isn't arranged the way I would like it, but you can go up to here where it says responsive, click the drop down menu, and it'll give you different types of devices that you can test it on. So you can test it on the Galaxy S5 mobile view, and then you could change it to an iPad or something if you want to see what it looks like on a tablet screen. So it's very handy using the element inspector when it comes to mobile view and making sure that all of your elements look perfect when they're being downsized. To exit that, all I have to do is click on the icon again and it brings you back to the desktop view. I also have extra classes around certain figures because those particular images have to be left aligned in their rows. And for the center image of the icon grid, I have the class for that image set to MX Auto deblock. So the MX Auto means that that margin on the x-axis will be automatically set, so that image will be centered in its column, and it's also being displayed in a block style arrangement, which allows the 2 lines either side of the image to be easily separated. So the next section of the page is the blog strip, which has the background image and heading text similar to the banner at the top, but it's not quite as big. So I'm just going to copy that. Also, before I move on to explain the blog strip, you can see in the CSS here to the left where I have created a line with the HR tag, which is a frequently used horizontal line, which you can find on W3 Schools or Bootstrap if you need to find code for that. Those are the 2 lines that go either side of the center image. I needed to have a negative margin on the right and left to bring them closer to the image because they were more spread out, and the line height is 1px, the same as the rest of the lines as well. Moving down, we have the images styled to be only 30% of the width of the column that they're in, because I created them in Photoshop in a larger size, so I had to decrease the size of the images just by giving them a width. And I usually always have the height as auto unless I need to define a specific percentage or pixel size, because if you keep the height as auto and just define the width, that means that the image will always look in proportion and it won't look stretched in a certain way. So I'm going to copy the CSS for the blog strip and save, and let's take a look at this in the browser. Yeah, so now it's appeared at the bottom of the icon strip. So let's see how everything works here. Again, I have the ID blog strip background, which I have set as an image here using the URL to link it through the images folder, and giving it the padding at the bottom and top as well, like I do for the other backgrounds. However, I didn't want this background image to be as big as the actual banner at the top, so I put less padding at the top and bottom of it. I also have the class column set as 12 because that's how I want it to remain throughout all screen sizes. And instead of using the standard H1, H3 and H6 colours, I've included my own style within the tags itself, because there won't be any hover effects for those and they're just going to remain the same on this page. I used the button danger again for this section because it has the same exact colour and style as the one in the banner at the top, which just makes it a lot easier when it comes to CSS. It means you don't have to enter in as much code. Although I've had to change the size of the text and the border radius and padding just because it is a smaller banner. I just had to change the font to smaller sizes in order to fit that particular strip, and I also made the text alignment center. This sort of style can also be used if you're wanting to center images, because this styles all elements within that column 12. Hashtag blog strip dot, column 12 followed by, let's say, H1 if I only wanted to center the H1 tag. I've actually set it for the whole column, so that means that everything within that column is going to be centered. So that's the 3 headings and the button itself. So if I added an image below the button, that would also affect it, which is quite handy if you don't want to individually style each element within a certain column. And then the final section of the page is the footer area, which remains the same on all pages, as well as the navigation bar. So we don't need to, once I've explained that, we don't need to go back over that. I put the code for the footer and the back to top button at the bottom of my styles for each breakpoint, because those are generally at the bottom of every page. So I just like to make sure that I'm doing everything in order of how it's presented in the website, just to make it a lot easier to be able to sort through. Save that and let's refresh. Yep, so now the footer appears here. It also matches the background colour of the back to top button, and then obviously it changes to the darker grey once you hover over it, just to make the user aware of where they are and what that particular button does. So that is the index page finished. I'll just explain the code for the footer to you now. So the footer is an identifiable element in Bootstrap, so if you don't want to create your footer from scratch, then you can just go onto their website as I showed you and just take some code from that and change it to suit you. Here I just created my own one by using a class footer to set the background colour to this orange shade, which I've used before in some of the text headings. So the reason that I use a class for this background and not an ID like I did with the rest of the sections, see, as I have the blog strip as an ID, the difference is basically an ID is unique and you can only use it once, whereas with a class you can use it several times on different pages throughout your website. So because the footer and the nav bar are going to be the exact same in every single page on the website, I have to make sure that it is under a class so that it can be used on the separate pages, whereas I wouldn't be able to use this ID on, let's say, the about page or something like that, because it is unique to this particular page. So if we go down, I have the footer class outside of the container just to make sure that the background is full width. Again, I've put some padding at the top and bottom of it, but even less than I did for the blog strip, because all I need in this section is basically text. So below that is the first row, which has the page links for the actual website within it. I have another class added in, which is another spacing class that you can find by typing spacing into the search panel on the Bootstrap website. And that just basically says margin left ML3. So that's just defining the spacing to the left margin of this particular row. I've also got the style for this row as the text alignment left. So everything that is included in this row will be aligned left. I have 4 different columns, which allows me to split each column evenly. So I have each column as a width of 3, and then once you get to the smaller screen, it's a width of 6, so 2 of them will take up half of a row, and then the following 2 will be on a separate row below them. So here I have the P tag styled with that particular color, which just affects all of the text in that paragraph tag, because I have the links defined here. And then to put them on a different row, instead of having the text links in the same row, you can add a breakpoint, which is this here, and that'll just put the element directly below the one above. And then into the next section is just links to the main ProfileTree blog articles that have been created, and I use a few of these on our blog page as well. And then the next section is the contact information, which has the phone number and contact email. That's always something that you'll want to include in your footer, just so that people have quick access to your contact information if they're not particularly wanting to fill out one of the forms or anything. This means that they can just contact you in their own time. And the final section is just the social media icons. They haven't got any links in them because we don't have the social media accounts, but within the links I have the images, they're all displayed in a vertical line below one another. I didn't have to apply as many styles to this one since the majority of it was text. I just changed the font size of the paragraph text over here. I don't have the horizontal line anymore, so I can just get rid of that. For the image styling, I didn't have to specify the column because those are the only images in that entire footer section. So I just need to state the footer class and then the actual image tag itself. Here I've set the width to 30 pixels and then the height to auto. And then in order to keep spacing between the images just so that they don't look too cramped together, I put a margin of 2 pixels at the bottom of each of the images. In order to keep the footer consistent with the navigation, I also changed all of the heading tags to the Source Sans Pro font, which matches the navigation links to each of the pages. Now I'm just going to demonstrate how to create a new section and explain what I'm doing as I'm going through it. So I'm just going to start off with an ID as a background again, just as I've done for the previous sections. So div ID is, I'm just going to call this one test. And always remember to close your divs. Then I will use the standard container. I always like to indent my code as well. So the way you can see here that in every row it goes in by a tab's width. So it just allows me to be able to identify different sections a lot easier. And then it also allows me to see where the closing divs for each line is, which is quite helpful as well if you need to edit anything. So all you do is press the tab button and that creates the extra space for you. So I'm going to make a row next. And then a column with, let's say it's going to be 3 things in a row, so I'll just do column 4. Now you enter in the closing divs. And I can copy and paste this. So now I've made up the 12 column width for that row. So I'll just add some text. Let's say H1. If you're using brackets, the text editor, then you won't have to keep writing your closing tags. It automatically does it for you because it can tell what the starting tag was. So I'll add some paragraph text now. Let's change the color of this to white. The reason that I only have to put in 3 Fs is because white consists of 6 Fs, and because they're all the same, you only need to declare it 3 times. The same with colors like black and stuff as well. If it's all the same, either letters or numbers, then you only have to repeat it 3 times, and that hex code will be easily identifiable. And then I'll put a button as well. So info, just to use a different type of button for this example. And close the tag. I don't need to put a href link or anything into this one for this example. Also, href stands for hyperlink reference. So you're referencing the location for a hyperlink. So it basically just tells that link where to go. And so I'll leave that for this particular column. In the next column, I will put an image. SRC means source, so that just means that the source is coming from, and then that's when you type in the folder and the image name itself. I'm just going to use one of the Facebook icons, so fb icon.png. Then in the third column, I'll just copy what I have here and put it in the bottom as well. So I'll save that. So I want this image to be centered in its column. So I'm just going to use the MX Auto class from Bootstrap 4 in order to center that image within that column. Then over here, I'm going to set the test background color as black. Now that I've set the background color as black, I'm probably going to have to change this. I'll take this out of the paragraph and put it into the column. Sorry, I totally forgot to define that. So yeah, make sure instead of just writing the hex color, make sure that you have the color defined there. That wouldn't have worked, but yeah, so that's just going to make sure that all of the text in that row is white, just so that it'll stand out against the black background. So I want to change the size of this image, so I'm just going to use the test ID followed by the IMG tag, since it's the only image in that section, and set the width to 50% and the height as auto, and save that. Let's see how it looks. Yep, so the background has been set as black. You can see that the Facebook icon is 50% of its column. It's not center lined though, so I'm going to see if I'm just going to add it in a class within the actual image instead of the column to see if that works. Designing a website also requires a lot of manipulation and just a lot of changes to your styles just to make sure that everything looks absolutely perfect. And sometimes things don't work the first time round. It really helps trying to go onto forums online to see if someone else has had the same issue. And there's lots of YouTube tutorials about how to fix alignments and do different transitions and just like loads of different features that you can add to your site. So don't be discouraged if you can't get something the first try. So I'm just going to add the class here. Oops. Let's give it a display block. And you can see that it was automatically centered there. I did input the white heading style for the second section, so that's why the heading there is still a dark grey. And then you can see that the text in the button here is yellow. And the default alignment for all elements is the left-hand side. The reason that the paragraph text hasn't changed color is because I think I have it defined as a specific color in the global. Yeah. So because I have the actual P tag itself declared as the dark grey color, that overwrites any other styles that I would try to apply to it, unless I specifically outlined it down here. So if I do test P color FFF, save, it should change to the white color that I've set it as now. Yep, so you can see that you just need to, if you have previous styles for a certain element, you just need to make sure that you're identifying that tag in its specific class or ID of whatever section it's within. And this is also why I was saying that I add the padding at the top and bottom of the sections, because as you can see here, the headings and the image are very close to the edge of that section, and it just looks better if you have that bit of padding to allow the content to have the appropriate space. So I'm just going to delete this section now since it's not a part of the site, but you can see how you build up your Bootstrap just using the simple columns and rows, and also the container as well. The Bootstrap website also explains all of this very well in their grid system and the flex boxes and different things like that. So I'm just going to move on to the About page next and remove this. So I just went on ahead and created the About Us page. I basically just copied in the code that stays consistent throughout the whole site. So it's just the header section, the navigation, and the footer, as well as the script codes at the bottom. Yeah, so the first section that is different in this particular page is the inclusion of the breadcrumb. I actually found this code on the Bootstrap website, so they have a section for breadcrumbs specifically. I think it's because it does advance your website in terms of search engine optimization and stuff, since you have each page labeled and the path labeled as well. So it's contained within an ordered list, and each list has a class breadcrumb item. So it's basically the same concept as the navigation, where there is a class nav item. I have the home set as obviously as the path where you would originally come from, and the link to that. So I'm just going to include the index .php, so that just means that if the user wants to go back to the home page, then they can just click on that text. And then you also have the active class, which means that this text here is going to be underlined because I've set it in the actual CSS here. When the breadcrumb item is active, the color is this offset of white, and then the text will have an underline underneath it just to make it stand out a bit more. This content here also allows me to put in a symbol, so I could put in a / if I want that to separate the two breadcrumb items. So currently I want to have it as the greater than sign. So the way it will be presented is the home text, then the greater than sign, followed by the About Us. So I'll save this. Currently I just have the link styled to that particular color, and then when you hover, it's the same color with no text decoration, which just basically means it's going to stay the same whether you hover over it or not. So I can change this to a different color or have a certain style applied to it so that it can be identifiable when a user hovers over it. Using the div class breadcrumb allowed me to apply a background color just like I did with the other ID sections, but I've set this one as a class because it will be present across the About Us, blog and Contact Us pages. So next, I'm just going to skip the next stage because it is the About banner, which basically is just the same as the banner in the index page, except I just use different text and a different image, but the styles are exactly the same. So I'll just move on to the section below the banner. So the next section is the profile area, which has the ID for the colored background again. So I'm just going to copy the CSS over. Okay, so this section uses the fluid container because I wanted it to be wider than the section below, which is just the area describing what each of the icons are related to in the index page and a bit about that subject. So in this section I have 3 columns of equal width, which is 4. And then once you get to the smaller screen size, each of the columns stretches the full width of the page. We also have the MX Auto for the image again, just to make sure that it's centered in its column. And then you also have the text here, which has been styled within the HTML to that dark grey colour. I'll add the semicolon there. Although it works without having to do that, so in order to make something bold, you just need to put a B tag around it just to make it stand out a bit more. Or you could use the font weight method in your CSS. Again, in order to create spaces, I used a lot of break tags. So you can see the breadcrumb at the top here, and then the profile section when we go down. So there's the 3 separate columns with the spacing in between using the breaks. And I've also increased the size of this circle, but I'm going to change it even more. Let's increase it to 57. And that looks a bit better. I would like it to be closer to the bottom of the text, but I'll just leave it as that for this example. So you can see here that using the fluid container allows the content to stretch a lot further across the page rather than the 80% width within the ordinary container. On to the next section, which is the About section. This is the main section of the About page, which I have set as an ID About section. I didn't set a background color for it, but I just needed it in order to style certain elements within that area. So I have it within the ordinary container class, and I have made an ID for each section. So this one is called IMT because it is for the internet marketing training. I also have specific styles for that row, just creating padding at the top and bottom to separate each section and allowing them to be easily identified. So the IMT section starts with the first row, which has a 12 column width header, and then the row below has 3 separate columns, each spanning across 4 columns. And in the first column I have capitalized text, which is also in bold, and then a vertical line which follows the same HTML as the lines that I previously used. I just had to change the width of the lines and the height as well. Also the percentage that is taken off the top as well. And then in between the 2 lines I have an image, which is the icon in the index page that the user would have clicked on to get to this point of the About page. And then the final column has an unordered list, which I've styled over here to have the font family pop-ins and font size 10 points. Then below that whole row, there's a new row with paragraph text, just giving a brief ending to that section, followed by another row with a full width horizontal line in order to separate each section. Basically, it's the same for every one of those sections, so I'm not going to show you the rest of them, but that's the CSS for that area. Where I've had to change the width and height of each image specifically to their section because some have more text than others, and it would make the image look a bit stretched if I kept them all the same height and width. The lines also had to be displayed inline flex just to make sure that they weren't in a vertical line and that they were aligned at either side of the images. This is also the CSS for the horizontal line for the About section. That's the reason why I used that ID, was just so that I could specifically alter the horizontal line, or else it would have affected every other line in the website with the same tag. So if we try this, you can see the column and row arrangement. So there's your heading in the 12 column width, then the 3 different columns which have the bold text, the image with the 2 lines either side, and also the unordered list, followed by the next row with paragraph text, and then below that the full width horizontal line as well. And you can see as you scroll down that each image depends on the size of the text around it. I didn't change the width of any of them, they all remain the same width. So that's the About page finished. The next page we'll be going on to is the blog. Moving on to the blog page, I've just copied in the navbar, breadcrumb and the footer just to keep those consistent elements in the page. So I'm just going to start with the first section of the page, which is the actual social media sidebar. So I have it within a class called SideNav. The SideNav is a class because it's being used on all 3 blog pages, so I can't use it as a unique ID. So if I go over to responsiveness, here it's called blog social sidebar. You can see that I used the class to set the background color, and the top value of 170 pixels basically means that everything within the side nav class is going to be 170 pixels from the top of the browser window. So it will always sit at 170 pixels from the top of the screen, as well as in a fixed position. So as you scroll down the page, it will also move with you just to have easy access to all of the social media pages. You can also see that I have within the href class that doesn't have a link contained in it. And you can see here beside the A class, there is a target equals speech marks underscore blank speech marks, which basically allows the user to open the link into a new tab. So when they click on the image which contains the link to our Facebook page or our Instagram, then they'll be taken to another tab in their browser, just so that they don't have to keep going back and forth within the same tab. And it means they'll still have access to the original site as well as the social media page. This would definitely be a useful thing to use on all of your links within the site, unless it's an internal link where you wanted to link directly to another page within the site. I haven't declared any columns within these rows because they're just going to spread across the whole row, so I don't really need to separate it into columns. Within the A tag, the image over in the left here in the CSS, it has the width of 70%. I've just put padding at the bottom, top and left hand side, just so that there'll be a bit of space between them and allow each image to be easily distinguished between. So I'm going to copy this. And let's run it. So yeah, you can see that the actual sidebar itself is 170 pixels from the top of the page, and when you hover over, it changes color just to let the user know which icon they're hovering over. Also, if you want to create padding or a margin between each of the images, putting padding around the outside of an image will actually decrease the size of the image. So if I use the inspector here, and if you go down to the bottom, you can see the box model right here. So basically these dimensions here, this inner box is, let's say this is where the Facebook icon image is, and the padding is the layer around the outside, which is where I put padding on the bottom, top and left hand side, which keeps the images slightly separated and easily distinguishable. So by putting the padding around the image, that actually decreases the size of the image within whatever row or element is contained. If you don't want to decrease the size of the image, all you have to do is define a margin instead, which is in the outer layer around the image. So that doesn't actually affect the size of the image, it just affects the space outside the element itself. So let's add more elements into the page. So the first section, I'm just going to copy the first section here, which is business strategy. And because the amount of CSS for this blog section is quite large, I actually had to create a blog panel CSS page as well on top of that, which I have linked at the top of the page in the header here. So it's just below the responsive style sheet. So I'm just going to load it up here actually. I'll just copy. If you want to copy all of the code in one page, you just press Ctrl A, and that'll just copy every single line of code in it, just so I can put it into a new file for this test site. So it looks like this for now because I also have other styles applied to it in the responsive CSS. So there is the head section, which is the top half of each blog area. And then you have the panel section, which is the area with the dark background below the main section, just with related blog posts and things like that. So I'm going to paste this directly below, refresh. So yeah, you can see here is the blog head section, and then below is the blog panel section. So we'll just look at the code for that. So the two sections in the blog page are here. This one is within a div class blog head, and then below the div class blog panel. I've also commented the outside of each blog post just to make it easier to identify. So in this case, the first one is any blog posts on business strategy. So in the first row, because I want to have the blog head section all horizontally aligned, I've just included one row with the two separate columns within that. So the first column equally with a width of 6, and then spreading across the full page once you get to the smaller screen size. The first section includes the image, which has the title of business strategy within it. So the second column spans the same width as the first column, as well as when in a smaller screen view. But you can put rows and columns within other columns, which I've done here. As you can see, basically it just allows you to have more flexibility with your design and be able to arrange elements in different column widths. So let's say, for example, the first column here with the image remains the same, and if we wanted to put an image beside that, but only have it half of the height of the image in the first column, I could make an entirely new row within this column to put in the image, and then another row below that to put text or even another image. It just all depends on what you're looking for in your design, but you can use an infinite amount of rows and columns in order to create your specific design. So we have the image, which just has the title of the actual section that we're looking at, which is business strategy, and then in the column below we have the main heading, which says business strategy, all you need to know, and then it also gives you a date of when that blog was released, followed by a description in paragraph text, and then there's also a button link at the bottom taking you to the full blog post in a new tab within our main ProfileTree website. And I also used a different type of button class, which is button dark in this case, and I styled the button dark classes so that they can be used throughout all of the blog head sections on every blog page. So this area here is what represents this head section here. So this is the image in the 6 width column, and then here is the heading and text and button as well. So below is the blog panel area, which we can see here, which is directly below. It's also in a fluid container rather than the ordinary container which the blog head was in. You can also insert columns with no elements within them just to pad out some space, which is what I needed here because I only wanted the lines either side of the related posts heading to be 1 column width, and the related posts had to be centered in that row. So in order to make up the 12 columns, I had to put 2 blank 4 column width classes either side, but that doesn't really affect anything unless it comes to responsiveness and there's extra space. All you need to do is use your CSS to hide those elements or hide those particular classes within the blog panel once you get past a certain screen size, if it really affects the appearance. Below the heading, I have another row, which is what contains each of the images with the button and blog section. So here we have class overlay MX Auto, so the MX Auto will automatically center the image, and we've already set the text align to center as well. So this is the first overlay here. There's a transition of 0.3 seconds, which allows the background image to change from the first financial management PNG to the second financial management image once the user hovers over it, and its opacity changes to 1. So basically it becomes visible and appears over the first financial management image. I also set them to a specific width because they are set as background images rather than just placing the actual image tag in themselves. Over in the HTML, I just placed a heading tag and a paragraph tag, which gives a brief description of the blog itself and then provides a link to that blog post. This is the one where I created the separate blog post page myself, but with the rest of them I just have the full link to the me and ProfileTree website. So we can see that once you hover over the area where the background images are, and they all display their overlay, which changes the opacity of the background image and allows the text to be more visible in the center. The paragraph text shouldn't be showing up here, so I'm just going to edit this CSS here so that the paragraph text is hidden until you hover over it. So blog panel, and I think that's the only paragraph text within the blog panel. I'll just make sure here. Yeah, so visibility is hidden for the p tag, so I'm just going to test this out to make sure that the actual paragraph tag has disappeared. Yeah, so now you can see that the paragraph has been hidden, and in order for it to appear once you hover, I'll just look and see what style is around it. Now, in order to make it visible once you hover, you again type in the blog panel class, and then it is also each of the overlays have that MX Auto class, so they all contain that class, which means I can use this as the hover. So it's saying that once you hover over that section, then the p tag will become visible. And save that. Yeah, so now once you hover over the actual blog panel MX Auto section, then the paragraph tag will appear. So that just adds an extra interactive feature for your user and encourages them to individually focus on each blog section and to investigate further, since you're only giving them a brief description on what the actual article is about. So on the CSS in the left here, you can see that I've set the actual blog panel background to a height of 350 pixels and the width is 100% of the screen. The height will be adjustable depending on what screen size you're using, so that'll be done in the responsive code later on, which I'll just briefly explain to you. And then I also have padding at the bottom and top just to make sure that the background is visible. The code here is just for the buttons, which are the buttons that are within the actual separate blog post sections in the blog panel. So it's the same code as most of the other buttons used in the site. I just changed the background color and padding and font size and stuff like that. And at the bottom of all of the blog page CSS, I just have the CSS that stays consistent throughout all pages. So that is the fact that the column 3 class is displayed inline, so basically that is this class here. So any of the 3 column classes that contain these individual blog sections will be displayed inline in a row of 4 beside each other. And then the horizontal line is just the line that's underneath the related post heading here, as you can see, and that's just 200 pixels at this particular screen size, which is the largest one. That'll change depending on what device you're viewing the website on as well. So I'm just going to move on to the pagination section since all of the blog areas are all styled the same. I'll just reload the page just to show it to you here. So now you can see if we scroll down the page here, the social media bar stays fixed in its position and the layout of each section is basically the same. So you have the section header here, the blog head, and then the blog panel, followed by the next blog head and image describing what this section is about. And then there's just 4 on each page. I haven't created the other 2 pages, but the number 1 basically links to this current page that we're on, and then number 2 is the second blog page, followed by the third one as well. But you can add more depending on how many blog posts you want to put into your website. So the pagination code is something that you can get off the actual Bootstrap website. Let's see if I can access it here. So on the actual Bootstrap website, if you go to components and then scroll down, you'll see pagination below the nav bar. So if you click on that, then that'll give you several different options that you can use for your pagination for your blog or for any other multi-page sections that you want in your site. So the one that I picked was just the top one here, and then instead of having the words previous and next, I just put in the less than and greater than signs. The CSS for that is pretty simple. Most of it is just to do with the hover effects and how it changes colour when you hover over the numbers, just to allow the user to know where they're selecting. So now we can move on to the final page, which is the contact page. The first section of the final page is the map, the embedded Google map. And also you've probably noticed as we went through the pages that the active link changes on each page. So in the index, obviously it's the home page that's underlined and a different color than the rest of the nav links. So that's why you have the active class beside the index page, but now we're on the contact us page. So this has the active class within its A class, because that means that the user can tell which exact page they're on in the website. So I'm just going to copy over the map first to show you what that looks like. And save. Let's go up. And now you can see that the breadcrumb has adjusted itself. The contact us nav link is now a different color and underlined. And the Google map is the full width of the screen. In order to embed a Google map, I'm just going to go on to Google Maps, and I'm just going to say Belfast City Hall for this example. So all you have to do is press the share button, and then you want to click on the embed a map tab here, and that'll give you the actual iframe source for that particular location that you've typed in. So all you need to do is highlight it and copy, and then you paste it into the position wherever you want to place your map. You can also change the width and the height. If you want to have it as the full width, you just set it to 100%. And then you can just edit the height depending on what screen size you're viewing it on. On the embedded map, you can also move around. Since it's actually a direct link to the Google website itself, it has all of the capabilities of the real Google map. So you have the contact information with the 3 icons and the relevant text information beside them. And then on the right, the actual contact form where people can send you a message personally to ask you any questions about your business or to possibly become clients. I don't have the form set up to actually send emails to my personal email address yet, but I will show you how to get all of that set up through PHP code as well. So back into the code here. So the contact details are all in one row and they are separated into 3 columns. The contact information column and the inquiry form column are both a width of 5. And then the center column is a width of 2, just to insert that vertical line which separates the 2 sections. The contact information section is just the paragraph text followed by the image relating to the text, which I just arranged by creating an inner row and column class to separate out the 2 elements and allow them to be arranged without needing a lot of padding or margin separation. Then in the inquiries, this is a form that I actually found on the Bootstrap website. So if we go onto Bootstrap and type in forms, it shows you here the different types of form fields that you can get, and it gives you the exact code for that underneath. There's tons of different selections that users can make, like here the multiple select field, and then there's text areas, uploading files for CVs and things like that, or you can have check boxes and radio buttons and align them in any particular order that you want. Yeah, so I got my form code off this and then just edited it to suit my site. So you just have the form class and the method, and then the action is the page that it will go to when you're going through the process of sending the form information to the email recipient with the PHP code. So I have a field for your full name, email address, subject, message, and then the submit button at the bottom, and each of them have different ID names just so that they can be easily identified in the PHP code. I don't need these anymore. But yeah, that's basically the whole site. I'm just going to show you next how to link the contact form to your actual email address, and then after that I'll make the website live and that'll be us done. So I'm just going to move on to the PHP for the actual contact form. So just to re-explain here, the form action is the actual PHP page that the form will be redirected to once the user clicks the submit button. So I have it up here in the corner, and you can see that the first thing that is done is you declare the variables. So by using the form names, so here is the name for the actual full name field is form name, then for the email is form email, and so on. So what this is basically saying is create a new variable called your name, which derives from whatever the user enters in the field linked to the form name. And then there's a new variable below that called email, which is linked to the form email. This all depends on what the user actually enters into the form once they submit it. And then below you have a validation check, which says that if what is entered in the email variable does not have the @ symbol or a dot with 2 spaces in between, then there will be an error message saying email address not valid. So they'll have to re-enter it. That's just to make sure that users are giving you legitimate email addresses and not just typing in, random code or anything to try and implement like a SQL injection or something. So it's just like an added security feature. Then below you have the actual structure of the message, which will be sent to you once you've set it up in your email address. So it says a new variable called message is the following, and it says, hello, your contact form has been submitted by name, and then it includes the variable your name, then email address, which will show whatever the user's email that has been entered. Then below is the subject, and at the bottom is the comments, which is the message section of the form. And then below that you just have the end of the message with a full stop. So that whole section is the entire message variable. So below the message is the to variable, which basically outlines the actual email address that the whole message is going to be sent to. So I've just put it as my ProfileTree address, just for the purpose of testing the actual form. And then below I have email from, which contains the same email address. I had to create this because this is the only way that the actual form would work, because the server that my email address is connected to wasn't allowing me to send emails to my own address. So this was the only way that I could sort of get around that issue. And then in the header variable, this is just what displays at the top of the message once it's sent to your email. And it just says from, and then the variable email from, which will just be my own email address. But because I have the actual email variable in the message, I will still be sent the user's email address that they enter in once they submit the form. So I'm not going to be missing out on any crucial information or anything. And then below is the actual declaration of the mail function. So I just typed mail, and then you have the variables that you want to be included in that mail. So the first thing that you put is the actual to variable, which allows the user input to be automatically sent to whatever email address is within that variable. And then the next is the subject of the message itself, and then the header information. And once that has been mailed, the location of the page is sent to the thanks.php. This all happens within a split second, so it's not like, it'll take a while for the actual form.php page to load. It only takes a split second and moves straight onto the thanks.php page, which I have created here. And all it is basically a thank you message in the center of the page in a H1 tag, and then the background is an image that I've used across the full width of the screen. So returning to the form.php page, below the header is the exit function, which just basically ends the code and ends the process. So once it has moved on to the thanks.php page, the PHP in this file will no longer run. And then at the very bottom you have the function which checks the user's data inputs, just to make sure that any problems or errors are displayed. It's also an added security feature because it is ensuring that no one can add in special characters or anything that will create a SQL injection into the form to damage the site or to send any malicious files or data. Next, I'm going to briefly describe how to make your site responsive. It's quite simple, just as long as you use the breakpoints that Bootstrap have actually provided in their site. I'll just go into the responsive.css file here, and I currently only have the screen width of 1960 pixels and below. So all of the styles that are within this count for any screen up to that particular pixel width and below it. So I want to add some more parameters just to make sure that all of the elements are displayed correctly. So the next parameter is the 1199 pixels. So I'll just copy this. These parameters are slightly different than what they have in Bootstrap. They tend to do a minimum width instead of a maximum width, but I find that it works a lot better if you have the parameters set to a maximum width, just because it's easier to understand when it comes to what exact screen size that you're working on. So let's close that. Then the next one is, I believe it's 991. Yep. So we'll just paste that below. And then the next one is, so the 991 pixels would be on a tablet size screen, like a medium, which is what the MD class is in Bootstrap. And then the LG classes would be for the 1199 and above. And then below the 991 would be considered smaller screens. So the next parameter is 767 pixels, and paste that. Then the final breakpoint is for mobile screens, which is 576. The lowest standard screen size that any mobile or device would go to now is around 320 pixels, so there isn't really much of a need to do any styles for any screen sizes smaller than that. So I'm just going to paste this last one in and then add some content and explain how it works. So I'm just going to copy exactly what I have from my previously created style sheet, and everything is appropriately labeled just to make it easier to distinguish between certain sections. Just going to put a lot of space between this so that I can distinguish between the two breakpoints. So I'll just open this in an entirely new window so that we can view both styles at the different breakpoints. So I'll drag this over here. So the global CSS is staying the same because it doesn't need to change throughout the site, such as things like the font family, but you can change those once it gets to a different screen size if you want. I'm just leaving it as the same for the consistency within the style and the layout. So if we go down to the nav bar, you can see that within the 1960 maximum width breakpoint, the font size for the nav items is 12 points, and then in the smaller screen size of 1199 pixels, I've changed the font size to 10 points, which allows the appearance of the website to remain similar to what it is in the larger screen. So this is literally what responsiveness is. All you do is through actually running the website. So I'll just run one of the pages here just as an example. So this is the website in its full width at the largest size. So if I minimize this, and if you want to be able to see how many pixels wide your screen is, you just use the element inspector. And when you drag it in and out, it says the pixel number at the top right here of the window. So you can see, if you look at the navigation items, they are currently the largest size that I've defined in the CSS. And once I drag the window in, they've decreased in size just to keep the proportions within the actual site. This is also all done through Google Chrome, so the element inspector and the pixel width is possibly going to be totally different if you're using a different web browser. So it's beneficial to, once you've finished your website, to test it on all different types of browsers to make sure that everything's working properly and that the responsiveness is displaying the elements exactly the way that you want them to be. So if we continue to decrease the size of the screen, the layout of the elements are going to change because I haven't added any styling to them yet in their smaller breakpoints. So if I just move this in, you can see that automatically the contact information stayed right aligned, which looks quite untidy in that screen size because of the column layout and because the elements are right aligned in the maximum breakpoint of 1960 pixels. That counts for every screen size below it as well, so that's why everything's aligned to the right here. But I'm just going to go into the CSS and change the alignment of the elements at the smaller screen sizes just so it looks a lot more professional. And the form looks fine because that code was taken directly from Bootstrap, so most of their elements are already responsive. So if I find the CSS for the contact information here, I'll just bring up both of the windows again. So I'm just going to take this code here and paste it into, let's see what screen size that was. So that's 830 pixels. So I'm going to put it in the 991 pixel breakpoint. So if I just go down to the bottom and paste this in here. So the icons are currently at 100% width, but they could be smaller. So I'm going to change that to 90%. The text heading is right aligned, so I'm going to change that to center, and the same goes for the paragraph text. And the icons as well, so I'll center align them. And let's save that and see how it manipulates. So the images are way too large, but you can see that everything is now center aligned directly below each other. So I'm just going to decrease the size of the images now. 40%. Refresh. Still too big. But it is a matter of trial and error with these kind of things, just until you get exactly what you like. Yeah, so that's perfect. That's literally how easy it is. All I really do is copy the code that I have in the larger screen sizes, paste it into the smaller breakpoints, and then just edit the actual widths, heights, sizes, margins, just any styles that you've applied to it until it reaches the proper presentation for the site on smaller mobile devices and tablets and things like that. So finally, I am going to show you how to make the website live. Any private and confidential information will be blurred out, but I will make sure that the important tabs and headings and things will be included just so that you know exactly where to go and what files to transfer and things like that. So that's it for today's video. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope this was helpful. If you have any extra questions or if you're stuck with something, don't be afraid to leave a comment, and to make sure that you're searching on forums for different code snippets that are just going to help make your site development a lot easier. And thank you from us here at ProfileTree.